everyone, Cam White here, and welcome to your 2022 Year Ahead Horoscope for Cancer, Sun, and Rising. In this video, we're going to be going over every major transit of 2022 and how it's really going to be specifically affecting you as a Cancer Sun, or as more specifically, a Cancer Rising. Now, this is a two-part video series that I'm doing. I have another video, which should be linked in the description or maybe in the comments, or hopefully YouTube's just recommending it at this point. But I go over every major transit of 2022, and I really thoroughly talk about each one of the transits in depth and what it means, right? In this video, we're going to be going over how those transits are going to be affecting you specifically as a Cancer rising, right? So make sure you check out that video if you want to be able to put into more context and you want a little bit more detail as to what 2022 has in store for you. Man, I don't know how I haven't used that rhyme before this. Anyway, also, if you want to have monthly horoscopes for 2022 and you want to know exactly what's going to be going on for you every single month, go over to my Patreon and become a patron, where I'm going to be having monthly horoscopes for every single month of 2022, as well as exclusive content and a bunch of other perks. So make sure you check that out. But anyway, let's go straight into the horoscope. Let's start talking about 2022. Now, there's two things really that we kind of have to start with, because we're ending 2021 with two big transits, and it's how we kind of plop into 2022. The first one is Jupiter is in Pisces now. Now, if you remember, in May of 2021, Jupiter ingressed into Pisces. It moved a little bit into Pisces and then stationed retrograde at about 1 degree, so it just barely introduced itself there, right? Jupiter is all about, abundance. Jupiter is all about your faith, your philosophy, your worldview. Jupiter is all about, what do you have hope in? What do you believe, right? It's all about those good things. Jupiter rules the sign of Pisces, right? So it's really comfortable being able to do its own job, just like maybe how you would feel more comfortable in your own home space. So Jupiter can do its job. Jupiter can operate at a really high level when it's in its home sign of Pisces. So Jupiter being optimistic, Jupiter being faithful, Jupiter being just looking at the bigger picture, right? That's how we're ending 2021. And Jupiter is going to be entering your 9th house specifically. Now, we're going to keep coming back to this Jupiter stuff throughout this horoscope. But the 9th house is all about your spirituality, your worldview, higher education. So like college degrees and things like that. The 9th house also rules like specialization. The 9th house rules publishing. The 9th house rules broadcasting. So sometimes like the internet and social media can really be thrown into the 9th house a lot of the time. The 9th house rules far distance travel, more specifically foreign like country travel. The 9th house rules really anything that's like far reaching and exciting. The 9th house definitely is also about like your spiritual identity, what beliefs that you have, your religion. And as Jupiter enters your 9th house, expect these topics to be really thrown in your face. And they're going to only build up and build up and build up and build up as time goes on for you this year. Now, this could, again, Jupiter entered Pisces in May and June of 2021. So maybe you got, maybe you started getting into astrology. Maybe you were thinking about traveling to a different country. Jupiter, think about May and June and what kind of started there, what maybe opportunities kind of arose, because Jupiter is going to go back into Pisces and you're going to kind of follow up on those opportunities. Jupiter also rules your 6th house of your work and your routine and your day-to-day activities. So this can involve your work and your routines. This can involve coworkers. This can involve your health too. But Jupiter is going into your 9th house. There's going to be this huge focus in this like uplifting in the spiritual world for you, with broadcasting, with publishing, with all of that stuff, right? So that's really cool that we start the year that way. Unfortunately, though, we also start the year off with Venus retrograde. Now, I've really talked a lot about this Venus retrograde. I should have a video of it linked somewhere, or if not, it should be floating around on YouTube. But here's the thing. Venus stations retrograde in November, or Venus technically enters shadow in November of 2021, stations retrograde right before Christmas of 2021, and is going to be pretty much retrograde all of January. So here's the thing. Venus being retrograde in your 7th house. Venus rules values. Venus rules fun. Venus rules indulgence. Venus rules connection, right? In the sign of Capricorn, Capricorn is all about rules, tradition, boundaries, systems, and regulations. So Venus retrograding, a retrograde meaning like Venus being about value and what we enjoy, retrograde being about that change. Like there's a change in what we enjoy. Maybe we're not liking the rules. Maybe the rules aren't working anymore. And there needs to be a value shift when it comes to your relationships. And this is in your seventh house of relationships. If the first house is all about you, the seventh house is all about any other individual. So this could be your partner that you're married to. This could be, and by the way, astrology is not always about you. Like this, like let's say you've been married forever and you're not getting a divorce anytime soon. This could be like, something going on with your partner in a weird way. Like it's like something's going on with them that they've got shit going on. The seventh house is realistically any individual, like a specific individual. Venus rules your fourth house of your home and your family, so this could involve your parents. This also Venus rules your 11th house of your friendships and your community, so this could involve a specific friend. So a lot of relationship stuff coming up here. And Venus retrograding, there's a huge shift in how you work with people, how you operate within those relationships, and that's going to be continuing on as we go on, and we're going to keep talking about that. But the biggest thing I also have to talk about in January is this Mercury retrograde. This Mercury retrograde is really a doozy. Mercury will station retrograde on January 14th here. This is the day I have, exactly squaring Uranus. Now, Mercury enters shadow in 2021, and it enters shadow conjoining Pluto and conjoining Venus, while Venus is retrograde, so it's a little iffy. But Mercury rules your third house of your communication, and it rules your 12th house of like hidden enemies and secrets and things that you don't see, right? So hold on, let's think about this. Mercury rules the 12th house of things that you didn't see, and it's going retrograde in your 8th house of secrets and the occult and other people's money, and it's stationing retrograde square Uranus. I'm going to assume that there's going to be something that kind of comes as a surprise to you that you weren't necessarily expecting. It's 12th house and 3rd house stuff, so it's not necessarily like life-changing, but it's definitely like, oh, maybe a problem that you weren't necessarily expecting with, and it's like, it's a Mercury retrograde, right? Like it's going to just be really annoying if anything, but it's stationing square Uranus, and then which is pretty intense. So that actually leads us really to February. Whoops. Because we'll have that whole Mercury retrograde. Mercury will go back into Capricorn and pretty much hang out on top of Pluto. So this really looks like a big gigantic change within the relationship realm for you. Venus will be stationing retrograde at the end of the month, which really brings us to February, because by the time we get to February, hold on, let me do this. So when we get to February, look, Venus stations direct. February 4th, Mercury will be direct, Venus stations direct, and we're going to have this Mars-Venus conjunction for like over a month, and I talk about that a lot in the other video. But Mars and Venus being conjoining in your 7th houses, this is a few things we could say for sure. This is energizing your 7th house of relationships. So you got to remember too, it's super easy in astrology to think relationships, and we just always want to think, partnerships. Like this could literally be working in tandem with someone. So this could be like, maybe you're at work and you get teamed up with somebody, or maybe, I don't know how it's going to look for every specific individual, but this is clearly like you're not alone. Maybe you're working with someone, maybe you're fighting with someone, I don't know what that's exactly going to be, but with Mars and Venus conjoining, this is a lot of energy. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Mars is about fights and conflicts and energy and drive. And in the sign of Capricorn, Mars, is exalted. So like a strict routine and like a plan, Mars knows how to get to work, right? And this is in your 7th house. So there's all of this energy to like really, engage yourself with relationships. Venus is now direct, so you're really kind of applying this new value system, this new way of operating in relationships. Mercury is now direct. You're starting to understand relationships in a different way. It's, stationing direct on top of Pluto, right? Like that's a really dramatic change to how you understand and function within relationships, right? So that's how we go through February. It's mostly Mars and Venus going through your 7th house with Mercury. Then Mercury will enter, Aquarius again. But all February, Mars and Venus. They'll be also, by the end of February, going into March. This is actually kind of how we start March, but we end February with Mars and Venus. It's gonna be conjoining your descendant at some point, but it'll conjoin Pluto, where there's this like see, by the time we get to March, Mars and Venus are conjoining Pluto, where there's this really dramatic change within relationships, whether that is, things kind of blowing up in a weird way. Well, let's also look at this too. This is how we start March off. So March, excuse me, Mercury is going to be conjoining Saturn, right? So there's some type of announcement in this 8th house area. Saturn's been in your 8th house for a while, so there's been a lot of changes with relationships, a lot of like focus on shared resources and debt and money and the occult and secrets and like you having to be more serious, more disciplined in this area. New moon in your 9th house. There's a lot of new energy going on in your spiritual world, in your traveling world, in your higher education world. There's a lot of new opportunities there, but I think that comes with a gigantic change with relationships. And that's how we start March. But then what March really is, check this out. Starting on about March 6th, Mars and Venus are going to be entering your 8th house along with Mercury and Saturn. And pretty much for a good week. Yeah, pretty much a good week. There's four planets in your 8th house. That's not, well, here's the thing. Not everyone experiences everything the same way, right? So like one way this is going to look for certain people is like this is going to really suck for a lot of people. For other people, this is going to be a very new change, and it might be an intimidating change, might be a scary change, but it'll be like good for the most part. But for other people, it might just suck in general. Because here's the reality. The 8th house rules death. The 8th house rules things that are out of your control. It rules transactions. It rules getting fucked over, essentially. The 8th house isn't, a lot of people will be like, well, Cameron, the 8th house rules sex and I have spirit. And it's if you're having 8th house sex, that's fine. I don't think that really speaks to everybody. And I don't think it's really an appropriate way to look at the 8th house because of the totality of what the 8th house rules. Like, for example, the 1st house rules yourself and your personality, right? And like your identity. The 2nd house rules your money, right? Well, let's flip it and reverse it. 7th house rules other people. So the 8th house, being the opposite of the 2nd house, must rule other people's money, right? The 8th house has nothing to do with you sometimes. Again, astrology, your whole life doesn't revolve around you. So same thing with the astrology. But when Mars and Venus and Mercury and Saturn in your 8th house, this is clearly, let's look at the things that we can say for sure. This is highlighting that 8th house of death, other people's money, debt too. I see a lot of people have 8th house transits and they have to borrow money, lend money out, or they make investments, or maybe they lose some investments. The 8th house is just a kind of a funky area, and it really depends on your lifestyle and who you are of where it's going to actually show up. For some people, this is going to be experiencing some death, whether that is within like your world or just around you in general. A lot of you are going to be just changing a lot of yourselves too. But Mars rules fights, conflicts, energy. Mars is going to be in Aquarius. We're doing things, in a kind of a different way. We're kind of being stubborn and we're kind of fixated in our ways. Venus is there too. So we're kind of like, again, adapting, we're changing, we're having more fun with this. Saturn's in the 8th house. So this is kind of like you got to do what you got to do energy, really. Whether that's pay off some debt or do some time, whatever that is, whatever you owe. I think this is about whatever you owe, whatever you got to do. This is this isn't your time. This is like the stuff that you are owed, that you owe other people. And look, that's March mainly, is this Mars, Venus, Saturn. It's going to be weird. March is a very weird and strange month. Mercury enters Pisces too, which doesn't help because Mercury is in detriment in Pisces. So Mercury in Pisces is like trying to listen to, someone who is trying to explain their story. Like have you ever tried to like help out like a homeless person? They try to explain their story and it's kind of a lot going on and it's really kind of hard to follow and none of it really makes sense. And what's crazy too is it's always usually true, as crazy as it always sounds. Mercury in Pisces is really similar because Mercury is in detriment in Pisces, right? There's this inefficiency to communicate. There's this lack of understanding. There's this, crosswire with things. Mercury is going to be in your 9th house though, where Mercury rules communication, your rational mind, your thoughts, what you're kind of thinking about. Jupiter also rules your higher mind, right? Like where you're kind of like soul searching. So both of these planets of like the intellect and like your philosophy both being in the 9th house, there's a huge focus on your spirituality at this moment, your education, your experience, traveling, all of that stuff. But I think with Mercury in Pisces, logistically, this is going to be a nightmare. Like if you're planning on traveling, you might be doing all this, but you're probably going to have a bunch of problems. Mercury will get the job done. Like Mercury will communicate its message. It has to. But in Pisces, it's just very inefficient. It doesn't work that well. So Mercury being in Jupiter, like you might be like, if you take a college course at this time, like you might be a little overwhelmed with confusion. Mercury's going to conjoin Jupiter and Neptune. So this is really like, man, some of you are probably going to take an acid trip or something that really wakes you up in a weird way. This is a lot of things becoming very clear, but through a very spiritual and like almost overwhelming sensation, which is cool. I think it's cool. It's better than, I don't know. not having that. But Mars and Venus, here's the thing though. When we get to the end of March, Mars and Venus are like on top of Saturn. So there's this huge like restriction, right? By the time we get into the spring, Mars, on top of Saturn is like locked down in that 8th house. Venus conjoining Saturn is there's like, again, this attention, there's this value, there's this connection that's trying to be made in the 8th house. So this could be like borrowing from people, taking care of debts, handling your business, essentially, which brings us to April. We're just going to fast forward to April 5th. Hold on, I need a glass of water for this one. So April 5th is the game changer, guys. January sucks. February sucks. March is just weird. And then we get to April where it's party time for everybody. Everything's going to go crazy starting April. We're going to have this Mars-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, which is really interesting. Think of March of 2020 when lockdown started. That was the last time Mars conjoined Saturn in Aquarius, and it was in your 8th house. So this had to do with shared resources, other people's money, fear too. The 8th house just rules fear and anxiety in general. Mars rules your 10th house of career and your 5th house of love, romance, sex, and creativity, music, recreation. Saturn rules your 8th house of debts and other people's money and 7th house of relationships. Make of that what you will. But here's the thing. Venus enters Pisces. By the way, Jupiter's on top of Neptune at this point in your 9th house. So you're like really like your relationship with God, whatever that looks like, is going to be really solid. Even if you're an atheist, you're like really loving atheism or something. Well, I think maybe at this point, if you're an atheist, you're probably not because things are going interestingly. Venus, though, rules value. Venus rules fun, right? The indulgent stuff. Here's the thing. Venus entering Pisces means Venus is entering her exalted sign. Venus loves to be in Pisces. I'm going to give you an example here, and we're going to think about this. Think of The Great Gatsby. Wants to do things big, have a big party, right? That's Jupiter. Jupiter on top of Neptune is like the big party to get the girl over, right? Well, Venus in Pisces is like that girl that he keeps trying to impress to come over. That's Venus in Pisces. And Venus entering Pisces is like she shows up to the party. And it's party time in your 9th house. Let's also go back. The 11th house rules friends, right? And Venus rules your 11th house. Venus rules your 4th house of home and family. So these topics are going to become much better. Venus is going to enter your 9th house, so maybe traveling with friends, maybe like even some of you are probably going to travel abroad. But Venus is going to go to your 9th house. This is just going to bring so much fun and enjoyment to far distance travel, your education, your spirituality, online for a lot of you people that are doing online work. This is going to be huge for that. So let's fly through April because look, Jupiter's going to be conjoining Neptune. Try not to get into a cult is another thing. This is, I mean, like a lot of this is going to be like trining your guys' ascendant too. Like a lot of you are going to be on some shit, like really just like believing things and feeling good and having hope and like being excited. I know it sounds like taboo to think that things are going to be good, but let's go to April 30th. Now, as you probably noticed, Mars is now in the gang. So I think Mars has triplicity in Pisces. So I'm not really worried about Mars going into Pisces. It'll be an aversion from Saturn and it'll sextile Uranus. Like I think Mars will actually benefit. I think Mars going into Pisces will make this even more fun. I just think it'll be a little confusing. It's kind of like when you go to a festival and you're like, "Yeah, I'm at the festival." Then you guys just all stand around there and you're like, "Okay, now what? Where are we going? What do we do? We're all lost. What's going on?" Might be a little weird at this point, but what the day I want to get to is April 30th. Last day. Here's why. Venus is conjoining Jupiter. Now, Venus conjoining Jupiter is the two good planets high-fiving each other. But this just isn't any regular Venus-Jupiter conjunction. This is Venus conjoining Jupiter. So each planet has a specific degree of the zodiac sign that in which they are exalted, meaning they're at their greatest power. Like the moon is 3 degrees Taurus. I think Saturn is, I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's 18 Libra or it's 15 Libra. It's something in Libra. Anyway, Venus's exalted degree is 28 Pisces. So think about this. Venus is at her favorite degree. Like I can't get the timing right, but Venus will hit her favorite degree, 28 degrees Pisces, while also on top of the ruler of that sign, Jupiter, which Jupiter is just making everything even more big, while it's also on top of Neptune, right? So that's crazy. That is super good, like traveling with your friends, having fun with your friends, having friends, like This just looks great, but this is where it gets crazier. This is an eclipse. This is an eclipse where now, I didn't even mention this. Fuck, I meant to mention this. The North Node is now in your 11th house. That happened in January, where there's now the eclipses are happening in your 11th house of friends. So expect dramatic things happening with your friends, whether good or bad. Same thing with the 5th house. The South Node's going through your 5th house. There's going to be this kind of release around like 5th house stuff, around like love, romance, creativity, a lot of like fatalistic things occurring there. There's a big focus on friends and hobbies, or communities, and like for some of you, children. But this eclipse is happening in your 11th house of friends, communities, networks, and the ruler of it, Venus, is conjoining Jupiter at an exalted degree. Like this looks like a huge opportunity, a huge fun thing. Like this is just really the greatest day. Like I can't get over this day. April really shifts the energy in 2022. And that brings us to May. So here's the thing with May. Venus will go into Aries, whatever, not that big of a deal. But then Jupiter enters Aries, which is a big deal because this is also, wait, is this like on the same day? Wow, I just noticed this. Mercury stations retrograde, and then the next day Jupiter enters Aries. Actually, I think that happens on the same day. Pretty much. So Mercury is going to station retrograde in your 12th house. And here's the thing. Think about May and June of 2021. Mercury stationed retrograde in your 12th house where the eclipse is there. Rethinking things, maybe spending more time alone and isolated, maybe questioning who's on your side, who's not on your side. The Mercury retrograde will be a little bit weird to say the least. But Jupiter is going to go into your 10th house. Jupiter rules your 6th house of your career. I mean, of your everyday routines, your work, habits, health. It's going to go into your 10th house of your public legacy, how the world sees you, career stuff. So this is I would expect things to really blow up with your work. You're going to be taking on more work. You're going to be doing more work. That leads us actually to when Mars enters Jupiter. I'm getting all types of messed up right now. When Mars enters Aries, because here's the thing. Mars will enter Aries, and there's this Mars-Jupiter conjunction at the end of May. So like the end of April is crazy and the end of May is crazy. And this Mars-Jupiter, Mars actually rules your 10th house of your work and your career. And Jupiter rules your 9th house of publishing, and they're on top of each other in your 10th house. Mars rules your 5th house of creativity and recreation, and it's conjoining Jupiter. So all of these topics are just getting blown up. Like well, for some of you can handle it. Some others may not be able to handle it. It's going to, like, Mars conjoining Jupiter is like, again, like some people like going fast. Other people don't like going fast. Kind of depends on who you are, but you're all going to be going fast. And like, this is super great for work, super great for creativity, super great for like, you're going to be busy with work, whether you like that or not, by the time we get in the end of May. The other thing is Mercury is going to be stationing direct on top of the North Node in your 11th house, squaring Saturn. So I think you might be really active with your friends, but things kind of go a little bit crazy, and you might have to kind of differentiate who's your friend and kind of like who's your enemy. So that's how we end May. We then get into June. June is where the year kind of changes in a lot of weird ways, because by the time we get into June, Venus is going to be in Taurus. So you'll be kind of enjoying friendship stuff, or at least trying to for the most part. Excuse me, I need some water. What is it? What day does this happen on? Saturn retrograde. There we go. I was like, what day does this happen on? Saturn stationing retrograde will be really interesting because up to this point, most planets have been direct, and a lot has happened, right? A lot has happened since the beginning of the year. So Saturn stations retrograde. Also, while Mercury is still there, I think this is about your shared resources, other people's money, investments. This is just going to be the responsibility side of things. The weight of things is going to be really setting in at this point. So you might feel like really kind of like nervous or cautious about some things again, which I don't think is really the biggest deal, but you will feel it. Venus will be in Taurus, which is fun until she conjoins the North Node in Uranus. I hesitate to say whether or not this is a good or a bad thing. For some people, this might be great, a great shakeup, a great fatalistic change in relationships with friends in a good way, doing things sporadic, doing things spontaneous. For others, this might be a big destabilizing event with friendships, and what you thought was stable actually isn't stable. Mars is going to be going through your 10th house, and Mars is a malefic planet. Mars does rule fights and conflicts, and it's in your 10th house of the public. So I would expect things like it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So there'll be a lot of give and take, but what I can say is that June is radically different than January. Radically, I mean, everything is different at this point. It's really, really insane how different by the time June comes into play is. So June is really just then Venus is hitting the North Node. So again, there's this bigger direct call and this bigger urge to go towards friendships and community, but it's squaring Saturn. So there's this weird like boundary you have to make with relationships and people. And Mercury goes into your 12th house. You're going to start going a little cuckoo. That's really the big things in June. And then we get to Cancer season. So let's go back. For Cancer season, for some of you, it'll be your birthday, but if you should be a Cancer rising watching this, so it won't be your birthday. There goes the FedEx guy. Pretty much, yeah, that's pretty much all of June, really. Just doing a lot with work, a lot of things going on with work, a lot of things going on with friends. Venus and Mercury will go into your 12th house. You'll probably be, at this point, by the end of June, spending more time alone. For a good reason. You know what I mean? It won't be necessarily bad. But then we get to July, and there's two things that really happen. One is Mars enters Taurus. I don't like this. This is building up. The Mars-Taurus transit fucking sucks this year. And this is where like we start the year really shitty. We get a really good period for a minute, and then things kind of go back downhill a little bit here. Mars going into Taurus, Mars is going to go into detriment. Think of January of 2021. That was the last time Mars was in Taurus. And so you could think of maybe how things maybe slowed down. Things got more consistent. Mars entered your 11th house. Friends, community, networks. Mars rules fights. Mars rules conflicts. Mars in Taurus is stubborn. Mars is in detriment in Taurus. Mars isn't good here. So like fights and conflicts aren't going to be easy in Taurus. Energizing yourself isn't going to be easy in Taurus, which builds up to a transit that we'll get to in August. And so as Mars transits your 11th house, just expect to be kind of stubborn and feeling really weird about friends. But then we get to the end of July. We get to Leo season. I think things kind of bring a much more of a bigger attention towards your money and your work. But then Jupiter stations retrograde. And here's the thing. Jupiter flew through Pisces, conjoined Neptune, had that Venus conjunction, then entered Aries, had that Mars conjunction, and is now stationing retrograde at the end of July. Jupiter has given you a lot of new things to work with. And as Jupiter stations retrograde, some of that money train might be running out a little bit. Not in everything's just going to come to a halt, but like exponential growth can only go so long. And this is where things might stagnate a little bit. And you might start to question a lot of what you're doing, why you're doing it. Jupiter's in Aries, where maybe you might get a little tired. Mars is in Taurus and Jupiter's retrograde. Be like, man, I don't know if I can believe in myself much more. I just think this is going to be a big time for you to really keep remaining, being grateful, having faith in things. I think things will still continue to be pretty good for you for the most part. Like the sun's in your second house. I think Mars and Taurus, I just think things might be slowing down, or you might be too busy, or you might be taking too much on, or you might be too tired, because that leads us to August. August, everything changes. August 1st this is a really interesting transit in terms of the world. I would expect, and I said this too in my video, I think there's going to be some type of disaster on this day, which will be really funky. But this is your 10th house ruler of your career, right? Of your legacy, how the public sees you. And then your 5th house of love, romance, sex, children. That planet's in detriment, so maybe this is more of a struggle. That planet is on the North Node, so it's intensifying the topics. The North Node just makes everything like much more like, you ever like have someone that calls you and makes their emergency your emergency, and you take on that anxiety? Like that's the North Node, right? Mars on the North Node, so things are really intense. But then Mars hits Uranus, where things are very destabilized. Things are suddenly shook up in the air. Things suddenly fall apart. There's a very loose structure. Things radically change. And so this Mars North Node Uranus conjunction is in your 11th house of friends, community, networks. I would expect an abrupt problem here. Nothing that you didn't see coming, but since July, Mars has been in Taurus. So there's going to be this big thing of like, hey, who is your friend? Why are they your friend? A couple days later, Mars squares Saturn. Mars in Taurus squaring Saturn in Aquarius is literally going nowhere fast. Mars in Taurus ain't budging. Saturn Aquarius ain't budging. So regarding friends and shared resources, regarding community and lending and transactions and death, there's and other people's money, and there's a weird stagnation, and there's a weird you could even say pause, because just nothing is moving at this point. Maybe when Mars conjoins Uranus, there's a sudden change, but then Mars squaring Saturn is like, again, going nowhere very, very fast, which is just in my opinion, a very frustrating transit. Very, very frustrating transit. I don't like the beginning of August. It just seems like, again, going nowhere fast, having some destabilizing issues. Last time we had Mars square Saturn was all of September of 2020. So think about how frustrating that month was for you. Which brings us to, and then Mars is really hanging out there for the most part. That's really all of August. I think the only thing that changes is then like Mars enters Gemini at the very end of the month, but we'll talk about that as we get into September. So as we get into September, a few things happen. One is Mars enters shadow. We're getting ready for another Mars retrograde. Mars is going to retrograde in Gemini. It enters shadow, I think, around here. I think it's at 8 degrees or maybe 6 degrees. I keep forgetting. Look, Mars rules your 10th house of your career, your public legacy, how people see you, and it's going to be retrograding in your 12th house of hidden enemies, the subconscious, self-sabotage, isolation, alienation. Mars also rules your 5th house, love, romance, sex, pleasure, your creativity, the things that make you, what you find fun. And as Mars enters shadow, we're going to talk about the Mars retrograde later on as it goes retrograde. But as Mars enters shadow, and Mars is in your 12th house, there's going to be this like wanting to isolate yourself more, wanting to hide away. Mars in Gemini is very distracted. Mars in Gemini is very trying to do two things at once. And I think while it's in the 12th house, there's a lot of like self-sabotage at play, like a little bit of paranoia, like things not working out the way that you want them to, you not enjoying things the way that you want them to, and it's just not being right enough. And that will come up through September. It's really important to pay attention to things that you might put on the back burner, things that you may not want to address, things that, might be in your subconscious. It's really important to address that here in September, or at least start listening, start paying attention. In September, the other transit that we have going on, because like Mars will enter shadow, so all of this context starts to come up, right? Which is interesting because this is why it's interesting. Jupiter is in Aries, and the South Node is in Scorpio. So there's these two relatively major transits happening in Mars-ruled signs, and then Mars is going to station retrograde. So as Jupiter's in your 10th house and all this expansion is happening in your work, you're kind of questioning, is this, what I want to do? Do I like being visible this much? And I think as the South Node is in your 5th house, there's kind of this like changing what you used to, like what the 5th house is about your creativity, right? And what you enjoy. And as the South Node goes through there, I think the idea of like, what you used to enjoy just isn't going to be scratching that itch anymore. And I think as Mars enters your 12th house, this is going to be a period of realizing that you don't like something. That's what I really think it's going to be. And I say that because, look at this. Mercury is going to station retrograde exactly opposite Jupiter. And I really think this is going to be actually a kind of a prominent Mercury retrograde in 2022. Because Mercury's retrograding in Libra, what's right, what's wrong, what do we want? Mercury's going to be opposite Jupiter. Again, do you like all of this expansion? How do you balance this all out, right? Mercury's going to be trining Mars, so this is like really working out a solution, right? Mercury's Mars is in shadow in Mercury's sign, right? So a lot of this is like logistical. A lot of this is like, again, I don't think a lot of this is big deal stuff. Like a lot of like Mars in 12th house, you might get a little paranoid, but I think a lot of this point is like trying to find a solution and really realizing things that you do like and things that you don't like. Everything's in Virgo, so you're going to be like crossing your T's, dotting your I's for the most part. But that brings us into October, because that's really what September is this Mercury retrograde. Mercury will station direct on Venus, whatever. Not a big deal. Then we get to October though. And what's important about October is we literally start October. Hold on. To go back to the Cancer rising. We literally start October with Saturn squaring Uranus. This is not anything new. If this is a surprise to you guys at this point, you're not paying attention. Saturn has been squaring Uranus since the beginning of 2021. It squared Uranus January of 2021, I think in June of 2021, in December of 2021, and then December of 2021, and then I think this is the last and final square. Saturn's been in your 8th house of shared resources, money, other people's money, death, the occult, secrets. Squaring Uranus in your 11th house of friends, community, other people. It's bringing a big destabilizing energy. So expect more destabilization in this area. Don't make sudden movements. That's all I could say. Don't make sudden decisions. And if you do, make small ones. Don't make life drastic changing ones. And what's interesting is Saturn squares Uranus, right? So there's this big, like, what's going on? Like something just like radically kind of changes. But then, okay, mind you, it's October. Mars is still in shadow, right? Mars is about to go retrograde. And in October, Mars squares Neptune. I don't like this. I don't like this at all, specifically for I'm changing my seating position to talk about this. I don't like this at all for you, for the Cancer risings, because Mars is going through your 12th house. Like, you're really beating yourself up in your head. There's a lot of like just chaos and noise in your subconscious. And Mars in Gemini is like fighting with words, but then like it's squaring Neptune, where like, it's like, have you ever like had an argument in your head and then you try to say it out loud and it just like makes you look really dumb? Mars in Gemini squaring Neptune in Pisces. There's some type of confusion here. There's some type of misunderstanding. And I think Mars in the 10th house, Mars ruling your 10th house of career and public legacy rights, and your 12th house of hidden enemies, Mars squaring Neptune. I think, well, like for example, for some of you, that you might have hidden enemies like causing issues that you don't even know about. I don't like Mars square Neptune. I think you'll be really confused and overwhelmed with the confusion, I think is a good way to put it. Now, here's where October gets really interesting. You notice that Venus and the Sun are just like hanging out, but then they both enter Scorpio. They both enter Scorpio as pretty much, there's like this Venus Cazimi going on at the very end of Libra, which is awesome. This is really resetting your living situation, your home, same thing with your friends. It's going to be trining Saturn. Love it. But then they both enter Scorpio, right? And then check this out. At the end of October, there's like this solar eclipse on Venus while Venus is pretty much Cazimi. The end of October gets really spooky really quick. So with this like Venus eclipse Cazimi thing, it's happening in your 5th house of sex, children, love, romance, art, music, creativity. Your 11th house rulers in your 5th house. Your 4th house rulers in your 5th house. This is bringing up the nodes. This is the South node. The South node is a prerequisite to the North node. This has to happen in order for this to kind of go on. You going in this direction of friendships and community is going to lead to new changes in your interests. That's what the 5th house is. And I think this is when a lot of those changes happen. I think you might get rid of some friends at this point. Yeah. Well, that kind of leads us, and we're going to talk more about this here in a minute. But that Venus Cazimi is really the big deal here. And then literally like October 30th, Mars stations retrograde. So again, Venus is in your 5th house. Mercury is now in your 5th house. There's a lot of focuses on your love, romance, creativity, your hobbies, what you like, what you want, right? And then Mars stations retrograde in your 12th house, where I think this is about letting go of a lot of stuff. Mars in the 12th house. Clear that shit out. Mars and Gemini. Change your understanding of things. We start November, and notice, I don't know if you noticed, but Jupiter is now back in Pisces. So where Jupiter was in Aries, and it was all about like, again, Jupiter is all about your faith and your beliefs, right? In the sign of Mars, it's all about like, hey, like in order to do it, in order to believe it, you got to do it, right? Or in order to do it, you got to believe it, vice versa. And that's the kind of the motto in your 10th house from May, June, July, August, September, October. But then we get to November and Jupiter goes back in your 9th house. We're going back to that spiritual shit. We're going back to that feeling things out and vibing stuff. Here's the thing. In November, Jupiter will go back into Pisces. And Jupiter is pretty much going to be, it'll kind of be zodiacally squaring Mars. That square never actually perfects, which is good. But all of this water stuff in your 5th house, trining all of this water stuff in your 9th house, like it's a really wet November. It's a very wet November. It's a very emotional November. It's a very deep November. It's a very spiritual November. And I think while Mars is retrograding your 12th house, there's a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of the 12th house is, again, things that you didn't see, isolation, alienation, maybe making more time for yourself, healing. Maybe this is about like really going away, maybe taking some time off of work would be a great thing for this. But that leads us to ding, 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 November 7th. Write that down on your calendar. Look at this. Total lunar eclipse, super fat on the North Node. Mercury Cazimi at the same time. That's quite radical. This is also on top of Uranus. Like what? Squaring Saturn too. This is a huge transit. To be honest with you, I have no idea what this is going to look like. I think where it's going to come from is there's going to be this realization, this clarity, this clearing up with 5th house, love, romance stuff. It's squaring Saturn. There's something getting in the way, and there's this dramatic, this is very dramatic, very sudden, very shocking, very destabilizing, very clear. I don't like this total lunar eclipse with your friends, your love, romance, your creativity. Like, maybe if you got a bunch of friends and you all, have hobbies together, maybe you just stop doing that. Maybe change I don't know. There's just something weird about this. This is also, I'm recording this in September of 2021. So this is just very far in the future. So many things are different at this time. So many things have happened, right? Yeah, this is truly this just really sets the whole month up, because while Mars is, I think also too, maybe there's hidden enemies and there's just problems that you just didn't see until Mars goes retrograde. Sometimes that's just how it goes. Venus is going to square Saturn, Mercury's going to square Saturn while everything's trining Jupiter. So there's a lot of hope here, but there's also a lot of reality setting in. Mars is retrograde the whole month, and then Venus will enter Sag. The really only cool other transit we get is, again, like everything will trine Jupiter. Once everything goes into Sagittarius, things are much more like about your work and about your routines and things like that. They'll be like Venus and Mercury are going to be conjoining for quite a while too. They'll be conjoining all through the end of the year. So I think this is a lot of cool ideas around like what you want to do, exploring different ideas of what you want to do. What I want to get to is this. Let's back up here as we kind of close this out. The end of November, we have this Mercury-Venus conjunction, like opposite Mars. So Mercury rules your 12th house of, like, again, hidden enemies, things that you didn't see, things that you didn't know. It's in Sagittarius where it's in detriment, right? So there's this kind of like difficulty with understanding things, but it's on top of Venus where there's this like excitement about adventure and there's this excitement about new things. Jupiter stations direct, where I just think to kind of sum this up and to wrap this up, this is like really understanding what your new vision is and taking that on, going forward with that new vision. Because I think this eclipse will really shake things up to say the least. Which that brings us to December. And December is a weird month. Not a lot is going on. There's this like full moon on Mars retrograde, which there's always a full moon on every Mars retrograde. I don't know if you know that, but it's not always as exact as like this one's going to be. But those full moons, you're ruled by them. And I think this is about Mars is retrograde, South Node in the 5th house. What needs to change? What needs to be released? What do you need to get rid of? What do you need to change your understanding of, right? Functionally speaking. And then that literally brings us to the end of December, where we end 2022. God, it sounds weird saying. With Jupiter entering Aries again, and Mercury and Venus are still going to be conjoining, but they'll go retrograde. Mercury's going to go retrograde pretty much on top of Pluto again. So again, big drastic changes with relationships. And that starts literally December 29th. So you're back to doing things big and bold in your career. But then there's still a big miscommunication with relationships. So that's how we end 2020. 2022 is a crazy year. Like it is, we are in a completely different world at this point than where we started from or end 2021 with. So If you guys like this video, please give me a like. Please comment and let me know what month you are the most excited about, what you're looking forward to. If you want to know if you want to know the monthly horoscopes, if you want to know what's going to be going on monthly for you, check out my Patreon. I have exclusive content, early release, ad-free monthly horoscopes, and so much more. Go ahead and check that out. But again, if you like this, please give me a like. Let me know what month you're also not looking forward to too. I'd love to know because there's quite a lot going on. But anyway, thank you guys so much for being here, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you, and I'll be seeing you next year.